So hi everybody and welcome to episode 77 of Level Up, 60 minutes of live Q&A where your questions and comments really do drive the show. Please let us know your name and whereabouts in the world you're joining from, the city at least, in the chat, because we love to hear from you and get everybody involved with us. Also in the chat, you'll find a link to vote up the questions that you would most like answered, and of course, to add your own. We live stream Level Up on Mondays at 8 in the morning and Fridays at 2 p.m. UK time to both YouTube and LinkedIn simultaneously. Now, today, we're going to be talking all about how to become a change leader. Now, this is irrespective, by the way, of where we might happen to be in the hierarchy of our organizations. Leadership is such an important part of achieving a positive outcome during periods of change. So how can you provide the leadership that your colleagues really need and keep true to your organization's values and purpose? Joining us today, we have an experienced panel, so let's jump straight in and meet them. Ian Clarkson rejoins us today. Ian, of course, is the practice director over at QA Limited. Ian's an experienced consultant, trainer, author, and coach who, I think it's fair to say, has dedicated his professional life to helping others improve their capability in project, program, and portfolio management. So welcome back, Ian. Lovely to see you.
Thanks, Nick. Hello, everyone. Delighted to be back. Joining you from Harrogate in the north of the UK, home of the Great Yorkshire Show. So delighted to be back, and here's to a great event.
Fantastic. And if you're unclear what that is, Google it, because it's an amazing it's an amazing event, and it's the most remarkably eclectic collection of local produce, the local rural economy, the whole way in which the community comes together to celebrate things. So it's a very, very amazing event to go and see. So very good. Thank you, Ian, for flying the flag for Yorkshire. Douglas Flory is on the board of the Association of Change Management Professionals, and he joins us today for his first appearance, actually, on Level Up. Describing himself as a changeologist, Douglas focuses on building great cultures through, I think it's fair to be said, is a human-centered approach to organizational design. So welcome, Douglas. Lovely to see you.
Lovely to see all of you, and thank you, Nick, and everybody for having me here. I look forward to a great conversation and learning along the way.
Okay, excellent. Thanks so much. Rejoining us today is Ron Leeman, all of the way across there in Thailand, I think, from memory. He's the founder, of course, and owner of the Highway of Change. He's built up considerable experience in the change management arena over the years, and of course is a regular contributor as well to Level Up. So it's lovely to see you again, Ron. Welcome back.
It seems like it's been ages since I was on the last show, but it is very good to be back, and I've been looking forward to this ever since I was told, yes, you're on. So thank you very much for having me back, and hopefully I'm going to ask some of the really good questions that are coming up.
Okay, excellent. Thank you so much indeed. We'll look forward to that. I'm sure that you will do. John Millar also returns to the panel today. John, you may remember, he coaches and assesses project management apprentices up at Leeds City College, also in Yorkshire, here in the UK. Welcome back, John. Lovely to see you.
Great to be here, Nick, again, and looking forward to all your questions, but please keep your questions coming in because we need lots of questions. Thank you.
Yeah, we certainly do. It's absolutely true. The whole show, of course, is based around the questions that you ask. So it's really lovely to see so many of you joining today, both on YouTube and LinkedIn. So I'm kind of picking up on some of the comments that we already have in the chat there. And I know that Shanice is online and she's chatting with you in real time as well. So you can put your questions directly to the panel by having an engagement, a conversation with Shanice. All right, very good. Our question master for today is Charlotte Millar, who joins us from here in the Thames Valley in the UK. Welcome, Charlotte.
Hi, everybody. It's good to be back. Thank you.
Okay, very good. And you're recovering, I think, a little bit. So still a little bit of a sore throat and things.
Yeah, still a little bit hoarse, I'm afraid. I've had my first experience of COVID, which was not a pleasant one, I'm afraid. So, yes,
Okay.
very much still in the recovery, but I am negative.
All right. Okay. Well done for shrugging that off. Not an easy journey for many people. So welcome back. It's really lovely to to have you back. So on that note, Charlotte, if we may, can we have our first question, please?
You can, Nick. And it's a question from Ron, one of our panelists. Would you say that a change leadership is more of a mindset than a hierarchical position?
Okay, so is it more of a mindset rather than a hierarchical position? Ian, why don't you start us off on this? Ron, if I may, I'm going to hold you back a little bit until a bit later on. Start us off, Ian. Let's see how we go.
I think it's a bit of both, really, if I'm being honest with you. Certainly, kind of my view, you can give somebody the hierarchy, can't you, in an organisation that might come with that kind of position of leadership, that might come with that kind of authority. That doesn't necessarily mean they've got the right mindset to kind of lead change. So I think there's definitely the right mindset. I think there's definitely something there to be open to a change, to be able to kind of be innovative in how we think about change and things like that. But I do think there needs to come some almost kind of like formal authority to help guide that change, which may come from that hierarchical position. So I think you need both. I would say there's a bit of both in there as well.
Okay, excellent. Thank you so much. Douglas?
Yeah, I think that's, I agree with Nick on, or I agree with him on that. And I would guess what I would add to that is, so many times as in change management, one of the common themes is we're trying to empower sponsors who may not necessarily be a change leader in their past, or maybe a change agent or a change network group. And we're trying to empower them to be our local leaders. So I believe it's a skill set that can be taught, but one that can also be in a role as well, officially.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much indeed. That's absolutely true. Thank you, Douglas. Ron, your thoughts on this?
My thoughts. I asked the question. The reason I asked the question really because based on my many years' experience, working in change management, I've seen hierarchical people, at the top of the hierarchy who have the right mindset. I've seen people at the top of the hierarchy who don't have the right mindset. But I've also seen people in the operational side of the business who have the right mindset. And these are sometimes the people that the operational people will go to for advice, for help, for guidance. And these are actually change leaders as well, but they don't necessarily have that hierarchical position. So yes, it's a bit of both, and I think it depends on the context about which bit it is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you make a really, really good point there. Thank you, Ron, and thank you for the question as well. Because not all leaders come with an official label on them. You can't always see them. And in my experience in working as a change management consultant some years ago, it was actually the unofficial leaders in the organization, not those with the badge per se, but it was actually those with the social networks, with the influencing skills, with the people in an organization that just know how to get everything done. It was those folks who offered the greatest opportunity for what I would call situational leadership. Douglas, what are your thoughts? And then we'll hear back from Ron.
Yeah, I think that's a great point that you both bring up. So I think the influencers, that's what I like to call them. The ones in the office that everybody knows, or maybe not necessarily in the office anymore, given where we're trying to figure out how to work, but the people everybody knows, and they walk in and they know everybody, and they're trusted authority, and they're respected for their opinion, and they kind of influence the way the wind blows a little bit. Those can really shape and influence the outcome and success.
Yeah, absolutely right. Ron, and then Ian.
Yeah, just very quickly, I see change leaders as people like the receptionist, who's the first person you actually see when you go into an organization, because they will have all the information you need and they will lead you in the right direction. Even the security guards, yeah, if you don't know where to go, follow me, I'll show you where to go. These are change leaders, and they don't have to have hierarchical status.
Thank you so much. Ian, your final thoughts?
Yeah, it was something Douglas mentioned, kind of the role of a sponsor, if you like, and I thought that was quite interesting when I think about that kind of role on projects and that kind of expectation of what they're there to do. And actually, certainly in my experience, often people are put into that particular role as a sponsor because of hierarchy, not because they actually know how to lead the change. And actually, to some degree, I think I'd rather flip it the other way and have somebody in that position who can lead the change. And certainly my experience of working at that level is it's normally somebody who is at the hierarchy, but not necessarily the change management skills. And that can kind of lead to a few challenges on the project or in the initiative because they're not leading the change, they're not driving the change, they're not being the change makers that we need. And I just thought that was kind of an interesting one from Douglas around kind of the role of the sponsor in particular, because I see that a lot. I do see that a lot.
And that makes a great deal of sense. All right, well, very good. Well, let's move on. We'll go straight to our next question. Charlotte, if we may.
Thanks, Nick. We've got a question from Tamira. During the change journey, how do you deal with uncertainty or difficult course of direction? For example, change of client leadership / vision.
All right. Okay. Well, that can really put the cat amongst the pigeons. John, why don't you start us off on this one?
This is a really difficult one. Thanks for the question, though. What I would say is that once a project started, people have to realize the time and the cost and the quality implications of major change, because it can absolutely knock the project you were starting off with for 6. It completely changes the project if there's a major change. And I think people do sometimes suggest change for a very good reason. They're very well intentioned, but it can absolutely mess up the original intention behind the project. So it's always challenging back to people and say, do you realize the implication that change would have? I think is really important.
Really good point. Thank you, John. Ron?
I think the key here is clarity in terms of you had your initial vision, you had your initial, this is where we want to go, this is the change we are going to implement. However, due to certain circumstances, that things have changed, whether it's an external problem, a crisis, or like COVID or whatever, then you have to again re-clarify what your vision is, because things have changed. And it's all about transparency, and it's all about the right level of communication. It's all about honesty as well. It's really getting the message out there and giving people the reasons why you're having to change direction.
Understand. Thank you very much indeed. Douglas?
Tamara, thank you for your question. I think that's a great one, and one that we often encounter is scope creep. At least that's what I often hear it referred to. Trying to manage the scope so it doesn't creep and become this or that, and mitigate those changes as much as possible. One of the things I'd like to offer as maybe a suggestion would be, I think a lot of times we become so focused on status reports, and it's red light, yellow light, green, what percentage are we at, those kinds of things, that I find that using like a canvas and reminding everybody like what's almost like a project charter, if you will, visualization of what's in play, what's going on. And it really helps to keep alignment along the way. And so that if there are new things that are popping up, well, then does it connect already with what we've already discussed and documented? Or is this something new, and let's explore it a little bit? But keeping that alignment as to what we agreed to our vision and goal is very important. So thank you, Tamara.
Yeah, it is a great question, isn't it? It's really getting us into the kind of the meat in the sandwich, to mix my metaphors from the cats and the pigeons. Can't really tell that I'm hungry, can you? Ian, what this would never happen, of course, with you, because you're, the master of managing the most unpredictable projects and programs and so on. But in the unlikely event that it was to happen, what would we do?
I mean, dare I say, change is ubiquitous, isn't it? And I'm not saying that we should expect change to happen on the project, because if we did, we'd kind of say, well, what's the point in planning? Let's just get on with it and let's just see kind of where the wind takes us. But I think it links back to kind of the previous question from Ron about mindset. And, if we've got that open mindset of, well, we can expect things to change because we live in a changing world. And actually, let's be open to that. Let's be innovative in how we approach it, and let's keep that communication open. I'm a big fan of always bringing it back to the why are we doing things. And I find with lots of organizations, the focus can be on the what and the how, and we lose the why. Or and what I say to organizations, it's very easy to forget you came to drain the swamp when you're busy fighting the crocodiles. And actually bringing it back to that why, I think, is a kind of really, really important thing to kind of keep people aligned. Because if things do change, hopefully the why you're doing it hasn't changed much. If it has, then maybe that's a different problem you're trying to solve.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much indeed, Ian. I mean, I'm going to break this down into two because I think they're related but distinct. So the first part of this around is how do you deal with uncertainty? Okay. And this is a very common issue. And I think early in my career, I made the mistake of trying to forecast, trying to get ahead of myself and sort of give people a false sense of security almost by kind of trying to predict the future. Well, that was a hiding to nothing. All right. So I don't think you can do that, nor should you do that. What you can do, though, is you can demonstrate consistency in working the problem. And that means, applying and applying and applying and being willing to look at the problem from lots and lots of different directions and lots of different dimensions in order to be able to make progress. So dealing with uncertainty, it's about coping with it and responding to the levels of uncertainty and the levels of risk and the levels of challenge that uncertainty brings. Now, the second part is, well, I'm going to use that lovely consulting phrase, it depends. It depends because the culture of your organization is going to vary. I worked for many years as a consultant and from time to time had the privilege of working with different organizations within the UK military. And for them, they get a new leader all the time. They're on rotation. So somebody is appointed, they have a certain period of time, the next person comes along, there's a degree of change, but there's also an awful lot which is the same. There's a degree of continuity. And the whole culture of the organization is designed and engineered almost around that frequency, high frequency of change in the leadership. So from that perspective, perhaps not wholly unexpected, but a change in vision is a much different matter and needs some careful thought, because it could be that the particular project that you're working on ought to be given up in favor of something else. It's not always the case, but there are hard choices sometimes when you're managing a program or project or even a portfolio in considering those things that were super important some time ago, but due to a change in circumstances may be less relevant today than some other more pressing and urgent matters. So what a fantastic question to ask a group of people who are involved in change management. So thank you so much, Tamara. Brilliant question. And if you are watching us online, it's time for you to put your questions in to the panel by typing them into the chat, and then we'll pick them up from there and put them to our group straight away for you. And in the meantime, Charlotte, please may we have our next question?
We do have a live question that's just been submitted, Nick. It's a question from Danielle. Danielle asks, how do you best approach leading change without a dedicated/official change team at the organisation?
Well, this is a very common circumstance to find yourself in if you're working at the headquarters or at a one of the multiple sites of an organization, or if you're working in a smaller organization. It's pretty common, actually, to be facing the change journey and kind of looking around saying, well, where's all this change leadership? Who's there? And then you come to the very quick conclusion that it's actually likely to be you. So, John, start us off. What's your thinking here? And then we'll hear from Ron.
I think one of the questions is, who can you find that will help you through this journey? And there are different people that you probably know of in each organization who are positive, who are inclusive, who can give you advice on assembling the right team to help through this change and to communicate this change to the wider organization. So I think that the key is finding a right set of people who've got the right set of skills and mix of skills to help with that particular issue effectively and drive that change through.
Thank you so much, John. And Ron, your thoughts?
I think it comes back to the question about mindset, because though the change leaders who have the right mindset, and I agree with sorry, I forgot your name, completely forgotten.
Right.
Having the right mindset, to find the people with the right mindset is key, because they're the ones that will actually drive the change and pull all the rest of the organisation resources that are necessary to drive the change together.
Mm-hmm. It's quite interesting, isn't it? Because in the absence of true visible leadership, several things that can happen. You can kind of walk backwards almost into this rudderless, sort of feeling of, we're just drifting, we don't know what's happening, we're being kept in the dark, and then people's minds start racing. Ahead of where you are, and you kind of think badly of what is actually going on, and you start to feel, some of these of your own insecurity then starts to surface, and people start to talk about it and so on. Or alternatively, that is the very time when somebody steps forward. Ian, your thoughts on this, and then we'll hear from Douglas.
Yeah, I was just thinking about kind of what John and Ron was saying, and thinking about the question as well. I think if you're in that situation, I'm going to go off on a slight tangent here. I think if you're in that situation, I think you've got to have strong characteristics of kind of like resilience and persistence as well, to find that person or the right people to keep going, to keep pushing, and to keep nagging, if that's for want of a better description, to kind of engage with the people that are going to affect the change. And if you're that kind of island, if you like, of trying to do this, having that momentum and drive to keep going, to push it through, I think is a kind of very understated and kind of very underappreciated characteristic as well. So I think it's a bit about kind of who you are as an individual as well.
Douglas?
Yeah, I'm going to say this a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but I think one of the most common answers we always hear is, well, isn't that HR's job? Well, people, right? And the fact of the matter is change just because they're in HR doesn't mean that they directly know how to lead or manage change, right? They have to learn it as well as anybody else. But my point is, to get to Daniel's question, is, when you don't necessarily have something, do something almost organically, or something that pops up, and you don't have a necessary structure or framework, like she's suggesting in her question, the thought in my mind, based upon experiences, would be like, okay, what is the challenge or the opportunity here that we're trying to solve for? And then how does that fit into company objectives for this year? And who is it that's maybe driving or leading an objective that this could tie to? And then go to that person and say, hey, what do you think about this? How does it connect? And then all of a sudden you could get a pool of resources or interest, and then you can, like others have mentioned, bring on those people who have that mindset and that is part of the way they work, and go and try and solve it.
Yeah, most definitely. I think there are always talents in the organization. Over the last couple of years, I know our business, we're relatively small in headcount, but we are very spread out all over the world. And we have been discovering all kinds of talents in our wider team that we weren't originally aware of. And just by asking people, it's quite interesting. Lots of folks will step forwards, and they'll step forwards with aptitude. They may not always have the experience, but they can well have the aptitude to learn and to help. And so that volunteerism, generally, my experience is everybody wants to help. All right. There are very few people that wake up in the morning wanting to be awkward. Most people actually genuinely want to do a good job and really do want to help. So they often will step forward. And with that aptitude, you can encourage, you can nurture, you can facilitate, you can help, and you can introduce them to some folks like these people on the panel who will be able to guide and coach a little and point them in the direction of some education and training and so on that could well help. So I would say my experience most recently is do ask for volunteers, Danielle, and every best wish for being in the eye of the storm if this indeed is about your organization. It might not be. It might be about somebody else's, of course, but great question. Thank you so much. Charlotte, let's take our next question, please.
Nick, we have another live question, and the live question has come in from Kirsten. And Kirsten asks, how would you integrate the change into business as usual?
Okay, so this is a fairly common, kind of frequently asked question. How do we integrate change into BAU? Ian, start us off, please.
Don't treat them separately, which sounds contradictory to doing a kind of a change, doesn't it? And kind of embedding it. But by that, I mean, involve them, involve the stakeholders in BAU in the change in the first place. How many projects have you been on where you've delivered something and then the business turns around and says, what's this? Really, that's not really what I wanted. Kind of, when we think about a project, we think about kind of benefits realization, we'll only get to that state when that change has been embedded. And, that change now becomes the new kind of modus operandi, if you like, and the new norm. And it's a case of, if we're not involving the people who are going to take it on, then how are we going to integrate it? So there's a big part of kind of stakeholder engagement and recognizing the importance of those people that are going to be using it. And often I find there's quite a disconnect, or they're kept separate, certainly in projects.
Thank you very much indeed, Ian. Ron, and then Douglas.
I think there's two elements to this. I think one element is how big is the change? Is the change going to impact, say, 90% to 100% of the organization? Or is it just going to be a focused bit of change that just impacts a certain department, say finance or HR? Okay. So if it's going to impact the whole organization, then what is business as usual? Business as usual will be what it is after go live. Whereas in the other situation where you say, you're just impacting one department or two departments or whatever, yes, there is a business as usual activity that sits outside those areas. So in that case, you have to, previously the word involvement came up, and I use the word involvement time and time again. Because that is very important, of actually involving individuals in the change so they can understand the change, and they will pass on their knowledge to their counterparts in the business, and then they will become more knowledgeable, and therefore the change then starts to motor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's such an important part, isn't it? That whole concept of the pebble in the pool. Really good thinking. Thank you so much. Douglas, final thoughts on this?
Yes, sorry about that. Yeah, definitely involvement is a key part of that solution. But I think one of the things I like to do when I'm starting off is understand the culture. What is the culture of this company, and what is their industry or their way of working? So what I mean by that is maybe, if you work in, let's say, a software IT company where it's a software as a service, and they're just repeatedly delivering updates, change for them is probably more normal than it is, say, a manufacturing company or somebody else. So tend to lean toward those things. But I think the other thing is when you're talking about groups where maybe it's less common, I like to use things like analogies to help them understand and storytelling. And so one of the things I found resonates is talk about, like, we all tend to subscribe to, like, let's say Netflix or Amazon or something like that. And they're constantly updating their new movies all the time. They're not telling you, oh, by the way, here's the change manual for the new movies we just gave you, right? You're constantly adapting to that. So using that to help them relate to it, and then also embedding the dialogue and the taxonomy into your conversation, and it's very important.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much indeed. Some great questions coming in now. Thank you so much, Kirsten. Really appreciate your question. I think it might be Kristen, actually, isn't it? Kristen Robin Dagana. I do apologise. Thank you very much indeed, Kristen. Fantastic question. Charlotte, if we may, I can see the questions are really starting to stack up, so we need to pick up the pace a little, panel. Let's take our next question, please.
Thanks, Nick. We've got a series of live questions next. The next one's from Diane. If you are a change leader in a multinational corporation working with different cultures and languages, how do you effectively manage change?
Okay, so this is a real challenge for folks because the question, the clue is kind of in the question, is that we're not always omnipresent. Across our organizations, and we also have a little bit of a prism, a personal prism through which we see the world. So we may be aware of different business cultures, but we're not necessarily expert in picking up on the nuances of them. So I would say one of the things that we need to think about quite carefully is building a network of folks who can help us on that change journey, all right, around us, so that we're not sitting in a kind of almost like an ivory tower, too far away, always imagining that, our view of the world is shared by others across the organization, particularly even true between sites, even within one country. We have some folks who are working in countries which are really enormous, and the culture in a plant or an office on the West Coast may be very different to the culture of an organization as present in, say, the East Coast, as an example. So really interesting and a great question. Ron, your thoughts, please, and then we'll hear from Douglas.
Not necessarily my thoughts, but anecdotally, when I first moved over here to Southeast Asia, I obviously looked for roles as a change manager and found it very difficult to get a role because I had no experience of Southeast Asian countries, the culture. Yeah. So I undertook research into culture of different Southeast Asian countries, and the research I undertook was in relation to the cultural dynamics of each country here in Southeast Asia, which gave me a very, very good understanding of the different cultures and what drove those different cultures and how that impacted change. And so that was the way I learned how to manage change in different countries, in multinationals.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much indeed, Ron. Douglas, your thoughts?
Yeah, my thought is an extension of what Ron just offered as well, is understanding the differences in culture is very, very important, because one way it may happen perhaps here in the States as compared to, let's say, in Asia, may be very different. And if I may, I'd like to recommend a book that I think is fantastic. It's by Aaron Meyer. It's The Culture Map, and it really helps you to map and understand the different cultures and the ways of approaching and working with each other. And she applies some real stories in there, and it's a fantastic book. I highly recommend that. Building those relationships will go a long way in the results, as well as, I also consider in their languages. So, as you're maybe drafting nations or materials to go out for everybody to use, perhaps engage or involve, as Ron and everybody is, involve people from that locality and help them to make sure you've got a localization and translation so it's appropriate when they receive it and they understand the true intent.
That's a really good recommendation. Thank you so much, Douglas. We'll get that recommendation into the chat. Another good one for you to look at if you're working in a European context is by John Mole. It's a book called Mind Your Manners, and it's a general excursion, actually, into the range of business cultures that exist and coexist and intermingle and combine and recombine across such a small continent of Europe, where a tiny journey can take you through 2 or 3 countries in a single afternoon. So it's very worthwhile having a dip into. It's been out for a long time, and but well worth it, actually. It's a very accessible, easy read for people. So some great recommendations there. Thank you very much indeed, panel. And what a lovely question. Let's move on, if we can, please. Charlotte, we'll take our next question.
Thanks, Nick. Excuse me. We've got another live question from a viewer. Koi asks, what is the best tool for tracking the changes so that the project can update quickly and have a better approach to it?
Ian.
I call this kind of like the magpie effect. Kind of we go after something nice and shiny, and actually, my advice would be, don't focus on the tool. Focus on what it is that you actually want to report out, and the tools and it can help you enable for that. So, and the reason I kind of use magpie analogy is because you can implement a tool and it's kind of like, oh right, okay, now we've got something. We must be making progress. It's working. It's nice and shiny. But actually, is it going to do what you want? I've worked with many organisations where they've implemented tools and it's kind of not delivered the benefit or the progress that they were hoping for. So I take it the other way and say, what is it that is stopping you doing it now? And kind of updating quickly. Work with the team to get the information that you need and use the tool to help that. Don't start with the tool. Start with what it is that you're trying to do and then find a tool to support that.
Thank you very much indeed. John, your thoughts?
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that to say that when a risk becomes an issue, don't ignore it. A lot of people sort of want it to go away of itself, and it never does. So I think is face it up to it. How is this going to impact my project? What do I do about it? What are the options? Talk to colleagues and your managers about it, but try and take a quick decision, but be prepared to review that decision later on. Your early decision might be wrong, but at least you've made a decision.
Yeah, absolutely right. Otherwise, you get this kind of snowball effect, don't you? If the project is lagging behind, okay, what is actually going on, and eventually gets just overtaken by the business as the problems kind of grow and grow and grow around it, becomes ineffectual. So it's important to kind of keep on top of that. The other thing that I would say is think about your comms planning carefully. Think about that RACI model of who is responsible and who is accountable, who needs to be consulted and who needs to be informed, and use that vigorously, okay? Because not everybody needs to be informed about everything, okay? Nor do they need to be consulted about everything. They just need to be consulted on the stuff that they need to be consulted on. So with that in mind, it's one of those things where I think you'll find the right tool. You really will. There are dozens and dozens of tools out there, but to Ian and to John's point, don't miss where the value is in this. The value is in understanding those big ticket items and being able to filter them and route them accordingly, rather than logging them, which is a fairly kind of low level type thing. So brilliant question though. Thank you so much, Koi. We really appreciate it. And thank you for joining us on YouTube today. Really great to see you there. Do give us a little like on the video. We always welcome that. Charlotte, let's move on. We'll take our next question.
Thanks, Nick. We have loads of live questions to get through. The next one is from a live LinkedIn viewer. Should change management be done according to the change readiness of an organisation?
Change readiness, that wonderful metric of how likely is it that an organisation is actually up for the task that lies ahead. If only we had a crystal ball to be able to tell that with any realism. In my experience, sometimes we get optimistic about the level of change readiness in an organisation, and at other times we are astounded actually by people's willingness to change. The one thing that I would say is that it definitely influences what, the pace at which you're able to move forwards and get things done in. And Ron, your thoughts, please.
Two forms of readiness from my perspective. There's organisation change readiness, which is done initially prior to a project or major change, and that will actually point you in the direction of where the major problems are, where the major pluses are, etc. And yes, it's important because you're going to get a lot of information from your organisation change readiness assessment right at the beginning that is going to help you throughout your change initiative. But then there's another sort of readiness, which I call business change readiness, which is a measurement of the readiness of a business for go live from the start of the project through to whenever it's due to finish. And again, it's important to follow that perspective because you need to understand whether the business is going to be ready for the intended go live date. But in my experience, unfortunately, not a lot of organizations do the initial organizational change readiness assessment, and then even less do the business readiness assessment.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely fair and true. Ian, your thoughts?
For me, there's almost an element of portfolio management, dare I say, in this, kind of understanding the totality of change that is on the books for organizations and how they're delivering that from a top-down portfolio level. And can that go some way to deciding, are we ready? So you talk about kind of the portfolio strategy in terms of kind of what is it that we want to be doing? And then we talk about the delivery plan, which is when, and, with a good portfolio management approach within an organization, well, for me, it should go some way to helping assess that readiness for change and when it's going to happen. Does every organisation have a robust portfolio management approach? To be discussed.
Indeed, absolutely. Thank you very much. And if we can solve that problem, everybody, we can retire to a private island.
Yeah, I was going to say, yeah, please let me know.
I would suggest. Yeah, absolutely. Answers on a postcard or even in the chat. Thank you so much. Charlotte, let's move on. We've got the questions stacking up. We need to cut through them pretty quickly, panel.
Thanks, Nick. Another live viewer question. How does change management change the organisation and who should hold the keynotes?
This is quite interesting, isn't it? So who, in your comms planning, who would you have delivering those pivotal moments for the wider organisation? Because not all of us are born communicators. Some of us may be excellent in our roles of leadership from a particular discipline, finance, or from an HR perspective, as was mentioned earlier, or sales, or so on. But who should we actually have holding those keynotes? Douglas, your thoughts?
My mind goes to this concept of senders and receivers. So who is it that's delivering the message and what is that message? To the question of who should deliver the keynotes, I think at least my approach or recommendation would be twofold. Number is, if it's a big enough of a change that everybody needs to know, then that probably should come from somebody that everybody in the company recognizes, understands, should be delivering that message, perhaps the CEO, the CHRO, or someone that they so designate. But then I think what's also important to understand is that yeah, that individual may communicate that message at the all hands meeting or the keynote delivery or what have you. But I think it's also important to understand that how will the managers in the middle be able to deliver that keynote reinforcement of the change? Because we all know, we've all been to those sessions, and we go back to our desk, or we start typing up our manager and we start asking, what's going on? What does this mean? And how can I help? Or, what is this? What's in it for me? Essentially, we definitely go back to our managers, because that's typically the person we most engage with or trust the most. Hopefully, ideally, trust. So I would make sure that those two people are part of the delivery structure as well.
Okay, thank you so much indeed. And so, from my perspective, I would say, first of all, it doesn't matter who it is. Find somebody in the organization who can really help them, all right, and coach them up. Because if it's a big change, then this is going to need some storytelling around it, all right, to get it constructed right, and to read that back and to play that back to folks in a proper and constructive way. We're going to hear from Ron in a moment, but really help them out here, really help them build those strong stories and engage with those key individuals, to Douglas's point, who are going to have to cascade this and interpret it and evolve that story a little bit further. So I do think there is something in it for being able to do that really well in an organization. Ron, your experience?
Yeah, just a very quick one. I found some interesting research the other day while I had nothing better to do, where it said that 75% of stakeholders would prefer communication from the C-suite or very senior managers regarding organizational issues, whereas 70% of stakeholders said that they would prefer messages from middle managers related to personal change, which is quite an interesting bit of statistic.
It's a great insight, isn't it, as to how we might, kind of look at that. And I'm sure that will also be conditioned from our own experience as well, that we draw on. Thank you very much indeed, Charlotte. Let's take the next question.
Thanks, Nick. We've got another live question from Nadia. What do you think is the most common mistake that people make when managing change?
That's a really great question, Nadia. And I think the insight that you're sharing here is first-hand lived through, first-hand experience. John, let's get your thoughts. Common mistakes.
I think the most common one is to give responsibility for just one section of an organization to manage the whole change if it affects the whole organization. And a lot of functional structures are siloed, and people aren't used to talking to each other across the silos. So if you have one of them, you need to create a cross-functional team to manage a big change. You can't just isolate it in one team. That'd be my big mistake, I think.
Okay, excellent advice. Thank you very much indeed, John. The other thing that I would add to that is just simply that people make the mistake of saying that people don't like change. I fundamentally disagree with that. I think what people lament is loss, and there's a big difference there.
Yes.
So just think about that for a little bit. If you're facing a part of your organization, a team in your organization, and so on, highly demotivational if they perceive the change as loss. So you really do need to think about that fundamental key question: what is in it for them? But brilliant question, Nadia. Thank you so much. I think you need to come on a panel so that we can explore that a little bit more with you as well. That would be fantastic. Charlotte, next question, please.
Thanks, Nick. We've got a question from Lee Mason. Lee asks, how do you separate change management from business evolution of cultures?
I think the two are intrinsically woven together. As things change, then your culture needs to evolve. As your culture evolves, then things will change. Now, I suppose the challenge for all of us, given that management is a verb, we want to be able to do something. So we want to change things for the better. So make sure that your change is aligned to your strategy, your vision, mission. And increasingly these days, the concept of purpose in an organization is a really valuable one to be able to explore. In the absence of your organization, would the world be any different? Would it be any better? Would it be any worse? What's the purpose that your organization actually has? Ron, your thoughts. How do you separate change management, or even should you, from business evolution?
It's difficult because, the traditional thinking around culture is that organizational culture is one homogenous entity. Yeah. But again, going back to some research I found a while back by the Oxford Review briefing, they found that people actually fit in to cultures in relation to the way they are culturally at home, the way they are culturally in a personal group, or the way they are culturally at work. So at work, you can have a number of different cultures. And we all know Edgar Schein's 3 levels of culture. That seems to be no longer the case, because you have elements of culture within an organization. So it's quite difficult to actually, how can I put it, suss out, for want of a better phrase, find out what level of culture, what the culture is of a specific part of an organization to enable you to manage change within that part of the organization. So you're looking at separate cultures all the time.
Thanks. Douglas?
Yeah, I agree with what you had to offer there. It's very hard to, for these, they're both kind of related. But I think the thing that I would like to share is, in today's era, we hear so much about digital change or automation. And that seems to be like the key trend, if you will, within change management. But there's also obviously other type of change. In addition to digital transformation, there's also culture change, and there's also policy change or organizational design, so many other things. With all of those, I would suggest that cultural change is maybe the hardest, just because you're dealing with people, and it takes a while for them to deal with the loss or the change, as alluded to before. But seeing the results of the culture change over can take time, and you got to have balance and diligence to make sure that everybody is modeling and exhibiting that new culture.
Thank you very much, Ian.
That's a great question. I've been reading it many times, and I keep coming back to that word evolution in the question, and that kind of almost like implication that it's almost like incremental, it's evolving over time. Whereas when I read change management, does that have a connotation of more transformational change, maybe? So is this about transformational change versus incremental evolutionary change? Because they're quite different, aren't they? So if we're thinking about a project, if we're not thinking kind of agile, but maybe more waterfall, there's almost that kind of transformation. Okay, stop doing what we're doing now and now start doing this. That can be quite disruptive. It can quite a big transformation versus the, kind of the evolution over time, or going back to kind of the pond, kind of is change management like transformation, like throwing a massive boulder in a pond, and the evolution of business cultures is like dropping a pebble and seeing the ripples go out. Interestingly, for me, I wonder whether it is about transformation versus evolution.
Okay, well, I think what we'll do, Ian, is we may ask Lee to come back to us either in the chat. Now, we're going to run out of time today, Lee, but we'd be fascinated to continue the discussion with you, all right? And I know that we've got other events coming up soon that deal with this continuum. All right, very good. Charlotte, next question, please.
Thanks, Nick. We have another live question from Yasmin. What are some engagement tactics that you have seen be successful with blue-collar workforce? What do you believe drives buy-in with blue-collar workforce?
Okay, excellent question here. One of the things about living and working in Europe has been what an amazing invention workers' councils have been. I think they really revolutionised industrial relations over many, many years. At first, they were seen, I think, with a little bit of scepticism, certainly by people watching in the UK. But having seen them in action firsthand and having been involved with transformational change in process manufacturers around the world, I've seen firsthand how that kind of level of engagement really does work very, very well. It's fantastic talent on the shop floor. There's amazing people, and you'd be astonished how many practical problems can be solved by just engaging in the right way. John, and then Ron.
Just very quickly, I just thought it's really helpful for a CEO or senior manager to come to team meetings and just talk about how the business is going every now and again and take questions. And if possible, show people how to read a balance sheet and show people what the strategy is all about. Because if people understand where you're going as an organization, that unlocks their ideas as to say, well, if that's what you want to do, this is how we can help you get there. But if you don't do that, if you don't engage in that way, people will feel inhibited from doing that.
Great advice. Thank you so much, Ron. And then Douglas.
Yeah, I'm a great believer in the use of change agents at a certain level, and depending on the project or the initiative, it depends on the level you use them. But I've actually used them at sort of not completely senior management level, but just below that. And I find that using change agents that are responsible for a certain part of the business, the impacted business, and for them to actually be the conduit into the business works really, really well, because at least what you have is you have that continuity from senior management down to the second level of management, then down to the blue collar workers. And it works as well if you have change agents from the operational side of the business as well. It works very well. But certainly having change agents who are responsible, who have certain roles and responsibilities within the framework of the project is a very good tactic from my perspective.
Thank you very much, Douglas.
Yeah, I'm going to offer 3 words really quick. And 2 of them we've already said. One is involvement, is ask. I think if you can do those 2 things with the blue collar workforce, you will go a long way. It will help you, as the 3rd word I will suggest in the suggestion. My experience tells me that you don't have trust with that workforce, especially, they're not going to follow you, and you're not going to go very far, no matter what your level of expertise and change may be.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. You need to speak from the heart. You need to follow John's guidance, and just explain stuff. All right, and be open to do that. And I know that many C-suite people feel somehow or another that their diary is too crowded sometimes to be able to make the time, but that time is a golden time. Makes all of the difference, to running a business. You're in the C-suite because you want to be running the business. Well, run the business then. Very good, excellent. All right, thank you very much. Last question, Charlotte, please, as we're running out of time today.
Thanks, Nick. Sorry, it's another live question from Diane. How do you encourage buy-in by stakeholders to the change and the change management process?
Okay, so how do we encourage buy-in from our stakeholders to the change itself? John, and then Ian.
Very quickly, I would just say right at the start, identify who your stakeholders are. This seems very straightforward, but often you ignore people like pressure groups, environmental interests, other people who have a stake, have an interest in your project being either going ahead or not going ahead. If you don't know who they are, how are you going to engage with them right at the start? That's me.
Great advice. Thanks very much indeed, John. Ian?
Visibility, transparency, and regular communication. Kind of making the change visible, maybe even having some kind of dashboard maybe that kind of says kind of what all the different metrics and how progress is coming along, and so everything's transparent, and then keeping it regularly communicated and keeping it regularly up to date. I think there's a lot in just giving that information available to people.
Thank you very much indeed. And of course, it's all about engagement with stakeholders rather than management. So it's a different word. So have a little think about how that might work for you and your organization. Very good. Well, look, what a fantastic exchange of ideas we've had. I've learned so much this afternoon in this last 60 minutes. So thank you, everybody who is online, who's been putting in the questions to the panel. Just a great job. You are our producers. It's your questions that really do drive the show. Closing remarks then on today's event. Ian, if I can come to you first, and then we'll hear from Ron.
Yeah, I think change is hard. And, let's face into that. And if we recognize that change is hard, then we know kind of what we're trying to achieve, I think. And that's kind of my kind of sentiment, but in a positive way.
Thank you. Always positive, always uplifting. Thank you so much, Ian. Really appreciate it. Ron, and then Douglas.
Yeah, very quickly. One of the questions, I think we sort of skirted around it a bit, the difference between change management and change leadership. Let me quote you John Cotter. We all know who John Cotter is. Change management is a set of processes, tools, and mechanisms that are designed as a way of making a big change and keeping it, in a sense, under control. On the other hand, change leadership is associated with putting an engine on the whole change process and making it go faster, smarter, and more efficiently. End of.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. It's always nice to hear a quote as well. So thank you very much indeed, Ron. I'll add that to my little collection. Douglas, and then John.
Yeah, I would just like to say, hey, thank you so much to you participated here. And I really enjoyed this experience of being with you and learning. Whether it was about pigeons and cats or swamps and crocodile fighting, change management is a topic that we could talk about in so much different angles, ways of working remote or in the office, whatever. I really enjoyed this. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I completely agree. Thank you so much, Douglas. Great fun as well. John, and then Charlotte.
Just to say, I've noticed that a lot of job titles are managerial, project manager, change manager, but we all need to be both leaders and managers at appropriate times. To take Ron's point, the person that greets you as you go into an organization can just be as a leader as a manager. So let's not get inhibited by the title we've been given about change.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, absolutely. What great advice. Thank you so much, John. You always bring that voice of common sense into every discussion that we have and really hit the nail on the head. Thanks so much. Charlotte, closing remarks for today.
Thank you, Nick, and thank you to our panel, and more importantly, to our audience who have submitted such fabulous questions. We can't provide the answers, and the panelists can't give the information that they do without the questions that are submitted. Amazing. Thank you to our participants and our panelists.
Okay, absolutely. First class job, everybody. Thanks so much, Charlotte, for navigating your way through all of the different questions and getting us pretty much to finish on time. So very well done with all of that. Not an easy task. And of course, to our team on social media, I think that Shanice Mitchell-Cox today, her fingers are going to need a little bit of cooling, water run over them as she's been keyboarding so quickly. Now then, everybody, what's coming up next? Well, on our website, as you probably know now, you can search for answers to more than 1,100 questions, which is a comprehensive free resource connecting you with more than 140 experts from around the world. Don't forget, you can also listen to us, to the audio versions of the shows on your preferred podcast platform. Now, we've hit several milestones recently, and one of them is the growing number of downloads that we have on the podcast format, which is really, really great to hear. So thank you so much for everybody for subscribing to that. What's coming up next on Level Up? Well, on Monday, we're going to explore the world of becoming a business relationship manager, another role which is growing in popularity and becoming greater, more and more clear, rather, in different organizations and more recognized as a distinct and valuable contribution to the overall team effort. Friday, the 22nd, we move on to look at digital leadership before considering service management on Monday, the 25th. Subscribe to the show and we'll send you a personal summary of what's coming up and how you too can join us here on the panel and, of course, level up your career with APMG. Thanks very much indeed, everybody. We'll see you next time.